Good to see everyone. Good to see the turn up as well. We're AFBE, Association for Black and Minority Engineers. If you're new to the organization, we run a series of events engaging both students and young professionals together in the industry. Some of our events includes the popular transition event, which is a sort of a mock assessment center, offering different activities to students, like CV and cover letters and assessment centers. The way you have standard industrial assessment centers is the same way we run the event. We have various mentoring programs. We have various people from different backgrounds in the industry, from chemical to electrical to so on, able to mentor you. We also organize various networking event. You're always free along, and we won't charge you for the drinks. It's always free. And we have a popular round table event as well, which enables it's like a discussion really between different industrial experts and we're sharing experience and so on and so forth. But yeah, today we have a special event. We've had to flip negativity into a positive. We're being blessed with Dr. Oli Folayan, who is a co-founder of the AFBE. Oli, if you should just give us a quick roundup.
Okay, so as in introduce myself.
Introduce yourself, yeah.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm a process engineer. I work and live in Aberdeen with my wife and daughter, and I'm also, as Sam said, co-founder and chair of the Scottish arm of AFBE-UK, and we set up our chapter here in Scotland in 2011. And since then, we continue to grow, and it's great to have this sort of collaboration, if you like, of the two Definitely. Sort of big sides of AFBE at this event.
Yeah. So for those who don't know really much about AFBE, if you could check our website, I'll pop in the chat below. We do have registrations as well, membership fees, shall I say, both for professionals and students. So if you're keen in getting involved, kindly let us know. We always love bringing new people in. So to something that's been affecting all of us really. About 3 months ago, it wasn't really discussed really in this country. Then slowly about 2 months ago, we started talking about it. It's the COVID-19, which has been affecting a lot of people. A lot of lives have been lost as well. It's quite sad because in my 26 years on this planet, I've never, seen such a thing before, and which is quite sad, which leads us to this today's topic really. As an engineering industry, we've had students worrying. We've had people started taking pay cuts. People were getting used to this working from home, even though it's not a new thing. People are getting used to it. Also redundancies as well. Ali, is this something you see, carrying on to the end of the year?
Well, I certainly, it really depends on the sector. So it really depends on the sector. Certainly within the oil and gas industry, we've seen a secondary impact, which is really an impact of the sort of big players in the oil industry, mainly Saudi and Russia, taking advantage of the current downturn and drop in demand as a result of the coronavirus to also increase production. You would say that sounds counterintuitive, and they're doing that because they know that the impact of that is that it will bring the oil price down significantly. And the reason they want to bring the oil price down significantly is because the big problem for the oil industry has always been the shale industry. The US is now the largest producer of oil, largest producer of oil and gas, and in order to, if you like, get them out of business, if you like, they have made that decision. It's not a decision that they can stick with for very long, for about so I expect that standoff, if you like, will carry on for about 3 months. And then after that, I suspect they will have to cut back on supply. But yeah, but you know, so that's one way in which it affects the industry.
Yeah.
There are tons and tons of other industries that will be significantly affected. We have something like 20 industries in which engineers in the UK work. The highest percentages being in the construction fields, in manufacturing, and in communications.
Yeah.
And the huge problem we have in those particular industries is that the problem will be caused mainly by the fact that many of the projects they work on, whether that's high speed 2, or you know, whether it's you know, house building, massive house building,
Yeah.
a lot of that is actually being supported, strongly supported, and strongly invested in by government. And the problem that we have at the moment is that the governments have had to spend quite a lot of money on trying to deal with the effects of this coronavirus. In fact, we've seen an unprecedented level of spending,
Yeah.
government spending,
Yeah.
and the impact of that is the fact that we will then have potentially scarce resources potentially available for those projects. So to answer the question, I see that we have short to mid-term effects, and those would vary slightly depending on the
And
industry.
then the industry. Oh wow, there's good excitement. I'm really excited about this discussion because I know
Yeah,
we'll be diving into different more aspects real soon.
that's right.
Just before we start properly, I
Yeah,
decided to have an icebreaker.
yeah.
I want everyone to use the chat box below and describe their last 2 weeks just in one word, so everyone could type away. Describe your last 2 weeks just using one word.
I've seen that.
Wow.
Oh, someone says uneventful.
Lots of different answers. So I think we'll start with the core foundation of everything in life, really, which is the
Yeah.
educational system. For my,
Yes.
for my understanding, a lot of universities are now looking into turning the practical projects, which every engineer student has to do, into sort of an online assessment. Now,
Mm.
the question with this will be: does this actually affect the knowledge and understanding of student needed? So some people might see this as some sort of a cheat code into passing the year.
Yes. Yes. So I think it's interesting because I think that what it's highlighting is actually what we've had in the last few weeks has been an increase in the direction of travel that the industry was already moving in. So by that, I'm speaking to about two key things. I'm speaking about the transition to a low carbon economy, and I'm speaking to increased automation and those sorts of things that lend themselves a bit better to remote working and all the rest of it. So that I think that far from actually reducing the quality of learning, or reducing the quality of education, I think potentially it could actually be a good preparation to where the industry is going. So there are some aspects. For example, you can't exactly do construction remotely.
Yeah,
You can't exactly do commissioning of live plant. Actually, you probably could do commissioning of live plant, but there are some aspects, I imagine, at
yeah,
this stage that would still need to be local.
yeah,
So there are some problems with that. However, I do think that the general idea that quite a lot of things can be done through automation that would have been done manually
Yeah.
prior. I
Yeah.
think that is likely to accelerate,
Yeah.
and I think an education system that prepares people with that sort of mindset
Mm.
probably is not wrong.
Wrong, wrong.
The other thing I would say to anybody in that situation is now is the time, maybe more than ever, to have very good relationships with people who are in industry. I've often said that, even before the COVID-19 and all of that, um, many people, particularly people from minority backgrounds, often will not get the opportunity to have hands-on experience before they get into industry. What they do have access to is access to industry people, and that's what organizations like AFB provide, is what IChemE and
Mm.
all of the various organizations provide. So I would say that yes, it's not a problem, but you can also you can make up for the sort of experience and knowledge gap by linking up with more industry people,
Mm.
finding a mentor, learning a bit more about the things that they worked on.
I totally agree with that because
Mm,
I think some people have been talking about potentially internships and graduate contracts being cancelled. So that leads to
mm.
my next question, which is, would that then be a sort of a delay for our future leaders?
I think so. I think, what tends to happen, I mean, if I to use the oil industry as an example, what happened is that we had one of our worst downturns from around the end of 2013 to something like 2016, 2017. And we were just in the process of starting to recover when COVID-19 hit us. And the problem that we had then is a lot of the big multinationals, the big organizations, one of the first things they decided to do was stop recruitment. And that is unfortunate, because what that means is very often you then have a gap. You have a knowledge gap, a talent gap. Whoever was a graduate engineer won't stay as a graduate engineer. They're obviously going to progress to a more senior position. You then have this huge gap. And when the good times sort of return,
Yeah.
these companies find themselves in the position of having to fill in those roles at any cost.
So,
And it just results in this kind of vicious cycle.
with that question, does that then mean that there might be a competition with 2020 graduates and 2021 graduates?
Yes, there might be. The only other thing I will say to people, though, is now is the time to also sort of think broadly. So, nowhere is that starker than in the industry that I work in. If you are a graduate, the truth of the matter is there will be fewer opportunities to get into a graduate job with the likes of Total. Shell have been quite good at keeping their recruitment, and actually they're one of the few companies that share price is actually going up in this current crisis. But there won't be that many of those around. There'll be quite a lot of companies who are, earlier on in the supply chain, who are potentially going to go out of business as a result of the fact that they were probably struggling in the first place. And so those opportunities aren't there. Now is the time for people to think creatively, think collectively, and think creatively. Think about where the opportunities are. Think about how you can use your current experience in an industry that isn't necessary, may not be the first one that you had in mind, but is potentially an area that you could transfer your skills into. So rather than sort of wait for the next sort of year when Total decide to start hiring again, for example, I would start looking broadly at pretty much everything that's out there, and just trying to get your foot in the door. The truth of the matter is there are many of those skills, especially at the early stages, that are similar regardless of the industry that you work in.
So every student, make sure you take notes. Be diverse with your portfolio. Don't be restricted to one, interest. Moving on to professionals now working in the industry. There's
Mm.
been rumors about people losing their job, and a lot
Yeah,
of people were due for promotion this summer, even pay
yeah,
rises.
yeah.
How do people deal with that?
Yes. Unfortunately, let's put it this way, right? There are a number of things that are likely to happen. and maybe we start with the reasons for this first before we talk about what's actually happening inside. The reasons for it is that very often manufacturing facilities, production facilities, supply chains are generally affected. You have a scenario where you have one company that is sort of designed to provide a service to an end user. And then you could get the situation where, because of the current crisis, they're unable to meet their deadlines. And because they're unable to meet their deadlines, that obviously affects them, affects their contractual agreements, and potentially, in some cases, put them out of business. Now, for the person that's working in those situations, what then has to happen is the business has to make some difficult decisions. And in some cases, unfortunately, that means shelving projects. And in some cases, that would also mean job losses. And I wish I could say otherwise. I wish I could give people a far more sort of sunnier outlook than that. But this is going to be a very, very sort of challenging time. However, there are a lot of very positive things that can also come out of this process. One of such positive things is that the areas of industry that we were already moving towards, so transition to a low carbon economy, increased digitization, those are areas that are only going to grow as a result of the current climate. And it's time for people to start to think broadly, think beyond the industry that you're working at, and start thinking about potential opportunities that may lie elsewhere.
So from what you described there, I'm guessing a little message I got from there was potentially there might be a high percentage of redundancy coming over here.
Yes, it's I wish I could say something else,
Yeah.
but the truth is absolutely
Mm.
there will be a high percentage of redundancies. I'm hoping it's not anybody who is on this call right now that has to face that, but there will be as a result. And the simple reason is that many businesses are already running. We have an economy that since the financial crash of 2008 has continued to run largely on credit. And, a lot of the government measures to support businesses in this time has been, for example, provision of loans and grants. But if you're already a business that's struggling, the option of sort of taking on a loan in order to keep going on, even if it's low interest, is probably not a viable one. And so for many of these people, what they've had to do in some cases is what they may end up having to do is shut shop, and that would mean redundancies.
And then that's it.
But that is one of the reasons why it's information is very important. Having the right links and connections, the right network around one is important. And that's what organizations like ours and the engineering community can provide at this time. It's really all about information.
That's good. One also thing I wanted to mention was the fact that you have different campaigns such as ethnicity pay gap and gender pay gap,
Yes.
which has been progressing for some couple of years now. With pay
Yeah.
cuts happening and redundancy kicking in as well, does that mean we then have a step backwards towards this campaign?
Well, we were just talking in the oil and gas diversity and inclusion task group about the potential effects of about the opportunities that for diversity that the current lockdown and the current climate might provide, but we were also talking about the risk. So certainly one of the risks is that diversity and inclusion takes a hit. One of the things we're taking on as a goal, and it is actually something that I'm going to be working on, is providing some sort of guideline support for leaders in our industry to think broadly about what they're doing when they're handing out redundancies, and to make sure that what they're doing isn't actually a process of making their companies less diverse by getting rid of very often the underrepresented groups. So there is a risk that it could take a hit. It is, however, up to us. It's up to organizations like ours. It's up to the task group that I'm a part of, and all of the various bodies to drum this into our leaders and to make them more mindful of the fact that just because we are in this situation, actually the current climate makes more of a case for diversity rather than less. And so, it's for the voluntary sector, if you like, to make that message clear to our industry leaders that they need to be mindful that the current climate does not result in a huge hit to diversity in general.
Everyone volunteering, please carry on with the campaign. We hope for things to get better. And also, one word I haven't really heard on TV for a while is the B word, the Brexit. Of course,
Yes.
Brexit effect hasn't really kicked in. Do you think with the deadly combination of Brexit and COVID-19, do you think this might cause a bigger impact?
It is well, I mean, the positive thing with all of this is pretty much every government that I can think of is they're all aware of the need for governments to come in and intervene. To come in and intervene in order to help industry, in order to support the businesses, in order to ensure that the supply chain isn't adversely affected. And so, one of the areas in which a Brexit would have had an impact, or might still have an impact, is in the changes of those contractual agreements between businesses that had previously occurred across borders and across the EU borders. But I think that because individual governments are all aware of the sort of global nature of this problem, I think there is going to be more of an effort for governments to intervene to support things, at least in the meantime. So whilst I think Brexit will be a factor, I don't think it would be the overriding factor, at least in the next few months. There might be other people with other opinions in the group, but that's my view.
Just to let everyone know as well, there'll be time for quick Q&A. So we'll let you know. Everyone can unmute and contribute as well. As we're aware as well, a lot of companies tend to sponsor the visa for employees, and with a lot of this issue going on, does that mean we'll start having reduction in visa sponsorship?
Again, I think it's almost like the diversity question that we were talking about. I think that if you have, it really does depend. It depends on particular skills that are required. It depends on individual companies' approach to recruitment and on their own agenda. On their own agenda, I suspect that yes, it will take a hit. If I'm to use the example of the last 4 years in the oil and gas industry, what we certainly saw was less hiring of graduates in general, and certainly a lot less hiring of people who are internationals, so that was certainly the case. Having said all of that, I would still advise anyone who wants to apply to work in a company, who is aspiring to be in the industry, to not let any of that deter you, to keep applying. And keep doing, it may mean that you have to wait a little longer. It might mean that you have to send a lot more applications. I was at a diversity and inclusion breakfast recently that was organized by Oil and Gas UK, and we had about 300 representatives of various companies there. And the one stat that I took away is there was a lady there from Pinsent Masons, the law firm, who was talking about recruitment in the context of diversity and inclusion. And she actually made this point that shocked everyone in the room. What she said is that if you're Nigerian, and this is pre-coronavirus, by the way, it says if you're from a Nigerian background, she said that statistically you will have to make 80 times the number of applications that your average person has to make, which really shocked everybody. And there are various reasons for that. And so those difficulties won't go away. And if anything, they'll probably become worse. However, there is no substitute to persistence and just to keep applying. And again, I'll come back to this issue, keep increasing your network, keep your network as broad as possible. One question I often ask people is, how broad is your sort of friendship group? If you're a student and you're at uni, do you speak to everybody who is like you, or do you interact with people who are broader than your immediate community? All of those things are necessary, because when you get into the workplace, you will have to do that. But they also have a particular importance in the current climate, that the broader your network is, the more information you get. And the more information you get, the higher the chance. So that the stat that we mentioned about the 80 times doesn't have to apply to anybody on this call, because it really is up to you to be as persistent as possible, and to take advantage of all the opportunities that are there. That doesn't have to be your experience.
Fantastic. So those engineers already working out on various projects, such as the infrastructure projects such as HS2 and Crossrail, or different oil and gas sector. How does this project carry on? Because we've been given certain finishing dates, and which
Yeah.
that will carry on now based on the issue we're currently facing.
Yeah, there are two issues there that relate to that. And, this is sort of looking at this across industries. So this is thinking about not just the construction industry, which I think is what you are particularly referring to there, but this is also looking a bit broadly. There are two issues. There's the one that we mentioned with supply chains, the fact that if particular deadlines are not met, very often the products that are being built, or the projects that are being carried out, are a function of various bodies, various organizations working in different countries and providing different parts of the supply chain. And what happens is that the moment you've sort of have one break in one part of this chain, it potentially has a knock-on effect on everything else. And if the end user had a particular if there are a number of things that can happen. It could be that for the end user there isn't that they needed the product or the project to be complete by a certain point for some other broader reason, and they're not going to get that. There is also the fact that what is being produced itself, the stock price of what's being produced itself, can come down, partly because of what's going on. That's particularly the case in the case of the oil industry. So a couple of years, for the last few years, I've been working on a project, the Glendronach Field project, that was being, it is the Glendronach Field that was identified by Total. And it was a large field, and it was a large field that had a lot of mercury in it. And what we've been working on for the last year and a half is a removal unit in order to get rid of the mercury. So that was absolutely necessary to be complete before the project, before the field can be produced, because releasing that much mercury into the atmosphere is not a good idea. And so, but what the company is having to do now is weigh up the cost of the gas that is going to be produced versus the cost of what it's going to cost to build this removal unit. And because the price of gas, even before COVID-19, has fallen, that is having a major impact on the actual project. So that, again, expect delays, expect delays and expect some projects to be shelved. Some projects, as I said before, are government funded, and if the government's spending all of this time, and in addition, they're asking all of you to put aside your particular area of expertise, and let's all put our hands together and learn to build ventilators. And in the process of doing all of that, there is a risk that the funding, the budget may not be available for some of these other big capex projects. But yeah, so the truth of the matter is, expect delays, expect challenge, expect in some cases that some projects that were due to start will not start anymore. However, I will still say again that keep your network as broad as possible. And just keep an open mind. This season, I think, is probably the beginning of quite a will be a seismic change for some, and that's to be expected.
Well, one thing you mentioned then was area of expertise, and one thing that comes along with that most people in engineering think of is professional registration.
Yes.
Do you think a lot of volunteers will still be keen on helping out with different institution with all this
Yeah.
issue going on?
Yes. I mean, one of the very, very positive things actually that emerged from this period is that the engagement is more. There are a lot of people, who are in that process now, where if you're not, you're not stuck in your office, having to run from one meeting to the other. It does mean some of us tend to work longer, but it does also mean that there is that time for some, more sort of interface interaction. And, the challenge I'll put to everybody here is that you probably, whatever it is you're studying, whether you're international or home student, please sign up with your professional organization. Sign up with, whether it's the Energy Institute, SBE, ICME, IMECE, IET, and all the various ones. Yes, try and find out how, even in this time, you can play an active role in being part of your engineering community, because I think that really is the key right now to getting through these very, very challenging times.
So I'm guessing this is probably the right time to be chartered, because I'm
Yeah,
guessing employees will start looking at that sort of a leverage.
yeah, yeah.
What do you bring to the table and those stuff?
Exactly. And the good thing about this as well is that they'll probably ask you for a lot less, in order to get chartered, because
Yeah,
you can't be physically there.
yeah.
So yeah, I would say certainly if you were thinking of, if you're a student, you may not be able to get chartered or even become a full member at this stage, but you can be an affiliate member. So whatever the professional institution is that is closest to your area of expertise, I would say find out the organization, join it, be part of it, and join an engineering community, and of course join AFBE as well.
Fantastic. Just before we start getting people to ask questions, I have we look at this remote working, and it's not a new thing. It's always been
No.
something that's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Why are people? Why do people find it strange? When it comes to working from home, people not being able to
Yeah.
trust themselves and keep on working.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily the people who are reluctant. I think it's very often the line managers and bosses who are a bit nervous about, they're worried that whilst Ollie might say he's working on the statement of requirements for a study, they're worried he might be watching Loose Women instead. Which I do often. No, I don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, they might be worried about that. But I think I think what it is very often we are still changing our way of thinking about work. And yeah, I think we're just getting to the stage now where we're learning, that you can be just as effective. And I think it's one of the positive things that will come out of
Come
this.
out there.
This
Actually,
season.
what we were discussing earlier when I mentioned reading an article this
Yeah.
morning, and the title of the article was actually Coronavirus shows shows people what people with disability have done for a long time.
Yeah,
Why did it take
that's
us
right.
this long to basically start putting webinars
Yeah,
online and
yeah.
virtual learning and those kind of stuff?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm waiting for my friend Tegwen's on the line, so I'm waiting for her to come in and say something about that because
Yeah,
she certainly knows more about it than I do.
yeah,
But yeah, there is. I think again, it's just mindsets, and
yeah.
what people are learning now is that there are ways of ensuring that people are still working effectively.
Mm.
So one of the things we've been doing where I work is we're having short meetings every afternoon. We've obviously got our list of deliverables, and the manager is able to know how everyone's doing. If anything, our meetings have gone up as a result
Yeah.
of working remotely.
Because one thing I realized is there was a lot of unnecessary meetings being organized when you could just send an email to get it done.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Too many meetings. Yes, yes.
yeah. Anyway, all right. Now we'll start taking questions from people. Anyone with questions? We've got some questions written down already.
Oh,
Can I
awesome.
can I jump in first?
Yeah.
It's Maura
In,
here.
introduce
But
yourself and where you're from.
uh,
Sorry to interject. There is a list of questions which I don't know if you can see it, Sam, on
Oh
my
yeah, it's just
screen.
popped up. Yeah.
People, yeah, so
Oh,
yeah,
people been writing questions already.
people
Okay.
have been writing questions already. But yeah, carry on.
Okay. So we've got different questions. One from Amrit, which says COVID-19 has emphasized the need for resilience in our system, i.e., the
Mm.
infrastructure and facilities, highways, distribution, and food. Okay, that was just a slight comment.
Yeah,
We've
yeah,
had
yeah.
people talking about the disability pay gap as well, which was
That's
currently at
right.
15%. Wow.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. It's the most shocking,
Yeah,
the most shocking of stats when
yeah,
we start talking about that. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, we've got a question from Manny. From your perspective, do you think students due to graduate this year and ongoing going into the industry, could they be rendered underqualified by the crisis?
Uh, well, there's always a risk. There is
Mm,
always a risk. There's always a risk that if people are applying for jobs and because there are fewer companies hiring, there is always a risk that people just keep applying and keep applying and keep applying, and in the process, build up a sort of gap in their CV that is not particularly helpful in the long term.
yeah,
And my suggestion in that situation is just going back to what we said earlier, is that we all need to, and that's all of us, that's even those of us with experience, especially those with experience, we all need to think a bit broadly about what we want to do. And we all need to think a bit broadly about what industries we work in and keep an open mind about that, and think of ways of rewriting your CV in a way that demonstrates that you have particular skills, but even if you don't have the exact experience that is being sought after. I can remember back in 2006 attending an interview, and I usually say that I can't remember how many times I'd never said that many no's in a meeting, in an interview. They'd asked me, "Have you got experience in this?" I said no. "Have you got experience in that?" I said no. "Have you got experience in some other thing?" I said no. But I said, what I do have is this, that, and the other. And I was able to demonstrate that despite the fact that I didn't have the specific experience that they were after, I did have a foundation that would then enable me to be able to thrive in that job.
mm,
And I eventually got the job. And I remember that one of the things that my lead, who'd interviewed me, said is that she said there were more experienced people than me who had applied for the job. That says the reason that she'd hired me is because I demonstrated a willingness to learn. And that was enough for them to say that we can put this person in this role, and they'll hopefully do well. It's always a risk hiring
Yeah.
anyone, but they were willing to take a punt on me because I was very honest and clear about what I didn't know, but also was able to demonstrate using my experience things that were similar enough for them to say, oh, maybe we can give him a chance.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I remember during my university years as well, looking for internships. I got a lot of on this occasion letters,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I had to actually go work for a volunteering organization to actually get the experience. So it's not
yeah.
always looking for paid experience. Sometimes you do stuff
Yes,
you're not paid for to get the experience you need.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, indeed,
So,
indeed,
so
absolutely.
Dr. Ozak asked a question about any thoughts or advice on how potentially affected professionals can build resilience during this pandemic.
That's a really good question. We had a talk, one of our real projects sessions last year was with the director of the RGU Oil and Gas Institute. It's a guy called Professor Paul Deleu, and his talk was about the future workplace. And he was talking about some of the jobs of the future. For example, has anyone ever heard of an avatar relationship manager, for example? And he was talking about a few of these types of jobs. The point I remember from that was a question he asked all of us. It says, how many of you have had any training in the last few years that was longer than 1 week? And I think there was maybe one person that raised their hand. Everyone else was pretty much just carrying on the basis. And the truth of the matter is, even without the COVID-19 problem or the pandemic, we were already on a course to a time when a high percentage of the skills that you and I use on a regular basis can be done by machines.
Yeah.
And we're talking not in the future, but in the next 10 to 15 years. And what he was emphasizing was the need for reskilling and upskilling at this time. So that I think one of the things that we can certainly all do in order to build resilience in this time is to start to think about, first of all, understand the direction of travel of the engineering industry in general, and then start to think about the skills that you can learn. And the great thing about it is that we are in this season or time when quite a lot of things can be learned online. Quite a lot of things can be learned without necessarily even registering for a course. Quite a lot of skills can be learned, and I think that is the best way to think about this. To think about, to start to think about the skills that you have, rather than qualifications, or rather than even your current experience. So that's one key way, I think. And then the other way, which I will continue to come back to all the way through here, is again increasing the people that making sure that the group of people that you interact with, that you get information from, that you exchange ideas with, are much broader than your current circle of friends. So it's time for us to start to maybe all challenge ourselves, to start to think, how many people do I know who work outside of my industry, who have experiences completely different, and see what we can learn, to see what skills we can learn from those people, or what skills we can learn in order to, in line with the question, build resilience.
That's good.
It's all about the ability to adapt.
Adapt. And I think one thing people don't fail to realize as well is when you talk about networking, you don't have to be physically there.
Yeah,
Platforms such as
exactly.
LinkedIn, for example, is showing
Exactly.
how to connect, and social media as well, such as Instagram and Facebook.
Yes,
You could actually find Twitter as well. I know a lot of people using Twitter now. You could actually find
that's
a
right.
lot of people there. You could connect with and just send them a polite message. Reaching out.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. LinkedIn has a lot of, there was a there was a graduate I met a year or so ago, and she was one of those people that was very, very sort of bold in the way that she would approach people, make friends with them, seek help. And it's no accident that this student, because it was a few weeks ago, somebody was calling my phone at something like, I don't know, 6:19 in the morning a.m. And I thought, who calls anyone at this time in the morning? And then I ignored it, and then it carried on ringing. I said, I had to text them and say, can I ring you back? And what it was is that they had attended an interview, and they'd been able to get a job. And this is something that came, you can look directly at the networking and all of that, and that helped her.
Interesting. Going to Owen's questions, I think it's a student-related question. He's asking how things are looking for the graduates next year.
Yeah, so the truth of the matter is it is going to be tough, but just to go back to what we've been saying, continue to increase your network, continue to apply. There is no substitute for persistence. Continue to increase your network. Another thing I would kind of suggest to anyone looking to get into the industry who may be struggling just now is that you can increase or help your experience through something we call shadow learning. And by that I mean that you get in touch with somebody who's already working in the industry. You get them to almost work with you as though you were working in their office, give you a number of tasks based on things that they themselves have done or expectations that they might have of a graduate. And you go through the whole process of learning, for example, in the case of process engineering, how to size a relief valve. And you go through the whole process, and that person takes you through the process. And by the end of it, what you've done is you've added yet another string to your bow. You've learned something. And in the, as something that could be said in an interview, it's certainly something that would demonstrate your commitment to the engineering profession, and would demonstrate your interest in the profession.
Yeah. I think following from that as well, someone asked, do you believe this financial crisis that's ongoing during this pandemic would have an effect on the current and ongoing new projects, which is something we talked about earlier?
It is. Yes. It will really just depend on whether it's a government-funded project, or whether it's whether it's the private sector. But I think they will all be affected in to some extent. And the message to everyone is just don't give up, persist, continue to increase the information around you. There are so many subject groups now on LinkedIn on various aspects of the engineering profession. Join those, get informed, get information. I sound like Beyonce now. Get information.
Just finding ways of religiously educating yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, let's more questions. I think Mara wanted
There
to
was
ask
a question from Mara, so
okay.
I think it's a live question from Mara.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Mara?
Hi, thank you both for a very enlightening evening, certainly uplifting given the 2 weeks.
Yeah. Oh, good.
My question is, there was an article, I think it was the Telegraph or the Independent, which talked about the impact of the sort of decision for A-level students to be assessed off sort of predicted grades or teachers' assessments, which are usually down to what you would have been your predicted grades going into.
Yeah.
I mean, it is worrying because one of the conclusions was students from ethnic minorities or sort of BAME backgrounds are likely to be disadvantaged because they usually outperform what has been a predicted grade. So, I mean, in that light, I mean, there's a lot to be said, and I think it ties also to Manny's question earlier that it's quite unfortunate because we're in a situation where students could be deemed underqualified because you're coming off having not written exams and leaving it to a very subjective assessment. But my question is there a role for organizations like ourselves as AFBE advocates, and hope that to some extent industry does acknowledge this and does take this on board and does not leave students from BAME backgrounds at a disadvantage because of that?
Yes, yes, and the answer is yes, because yes, because you know, somebody had a post that I sort of shared a few weeks ago, and they were talking about their experience, and you know, just describing what you were just talking about there, Mara, that you know, if you like, people kind of wake up at different stages in the process of studying, and in some cases, as you say, outperform you know, what somebody's sort of perception of what the students' chances are. And yeah, certainly, and you know, I think the only way that we can do that really is as an that kind of has to be as almost as an organizational level, trying to I don't know, reach out and perhaps writing you know, writing pieces that we send to people who are influential, just to think about it. I mean, because we are actually, it's almost, what we're talking about there is not dissimilar to what we were talking about in relation to redundancies in the industry, and the way that that might disproportionately affect people from minority groups. And the solution that we've kind of devised as the Oil and Gas Diversity and Inclusion Task Group, it is really to appeal via various media to leaders to be aware, to be conscious of the impact that this could have, a disproportionate impact that it could have on people from minority groups. So in a way, the answer is we need to influence the thought and the thinking through the various means available to us as an organization, or as a community of engineers from minority backgrounds who care about these things.
Interesting.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mara.
I think there are a few questions for Melissa, and rather than read the individual questions, maybe we just ask Melissa to ask her questions in one go. Melissa? Or would you prefer if we just read out the questions?
Oh, sorry.
You're probably muted. I do that all the time.
Yeah, I was. Sorry. So the question was, essentially, I'm a student and I am due to graduate this year, and the problem is I've had a few interviews and I've gone on to the second stage and to assessment centres, but obviously due to COVID-19 it's been postponed. And because of the postponement, the problem is you don't know if they're going to have spaces in the future to actually be able to continue. But because of my personal situation, I still need to get a job. So with a degree, I can obviously get a job in other sectors as well. Problem is, once I go to that other sector, how hard is it then to come back?
Well, I know of quite a few people in that exact situation who in the past almost tried to find an engineering job. In your case, you've actually been successful at the stage of the process that you were in, but for some of these people, they were just trying to get in, and in the meantime, you know, they had to be practical about the fact that they were still looking. And sorry, that's my daughter. Bye. sorry. She's trying to get a job as well as an engineer. So they, in the meantime, they've had to be sort of practical about the fact that they have to pay bills and they need to start earning, and they move into other industries, and very often it's very hard for them to come back. But there are many examples of people that do. The important thing is that you're giving yourself an option, and you know, there is no harm in you know, if you were to get into another industry, you know, you can then make the decision in future. But that would, you know, that would be your choice, and you're at least in the position where you've got some control.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. There is another question from someone with ID L04734446. Would you like to ask the question yourself, or would you like me to read it out, please? It's more of a comment, comments and questions.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I thought I heard a voice there.
Yeah.
Hello? Okay, I'll just read it out anyway.
That looks like somebody that works in Total for some reason.
Oh, really? Okay. So the question it's a common question, just shows what can be achieved when everyone has a common goal. These days, when compiling your CV, are your hobbies, outside work activities more relevant or less relevant than before? Do you think?
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely always relevant. Always relevant. I think these days, especially if we were speaking in the context of diversity and inclusion and getting people from underrepresented groups onto the workforce, and having positive sort of recruitment practices, then what the whole aim is to enable people to be able to bring their whole selves to work. And a huge part of that is knowing who that person is. I did have one place I once worked, a refinery, and the interviewer always made a point to find out what people did outside of work, and so I told them, because I used to sing in a gospel choir, I said I'm in a gospel choir, and I eventually got the job. And before I got there, the manager told everyone, says, you know that guy that's arriving, Ollie, he's a gospel singer. And everyone sort of knew that before I got there. And it was quite funny, because they spent the rest of my time there trying to get me to sing. But yeah, I certainly think that, yes, it is important. It's important to think about the relevance of is that we don't just put the hobbies down. It's important to ensure that whatever you're putting down is one that conveys a message and conveys to the prospective employer ways in which it could be good. So so for example, if I said my hobby was kind of going out on the lash every night and basically getting drunk every night, that may not go down. Well, it might actually work really well in some companies. They might hire you for that reason.
Team bonding.
Yes, it might hire you for that reason. I know some people who will not hire you if you don't drink. I'm only joking. But yeah, more often than not, is probably not the best. So yes, it is irrelevant, but make sure that what you're putting down is something that conveys a message. Everything is intentional.
I think we'll have one more final question before we finish.
There's one more question here. I don't know if Manny wants to ask himself or if I read it out again. I think there are a few shy people this evening.
Yeah, good afternoon. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so this is a question for Dr. Folayan. I just wanted to ask, from your perspective, I think you mentioned you're a process engineer. So I just wanted to ask, how has the crisis affected you in particular and your work?
Oh, well, it's meant that the project that I'm working on at the moment has had to be shelved. So I mentioned the project on the mercury removal, and that project, because specifically because of the oil price and the price of gas, and that drop in the price has been a direct impact of the decision that was made by the Saudis of this world and the Russias of this world to choose this time to run a price war with shale gas in the US. It's meant that those prices have come down. And if Total want to spend a lot of money trying to drill this well and build in mercury removal capacity, the cost, they won't realize that that expense quickly enough to justify the investment. So it has had a direct impact on me. So after this, I'm going to be thinking about everything I just said, and I'm going to be following my own advice.
Oh, thanks very much. Oh yeah, I'd like to thank.
Hang on, sorry. I think there's one more. There's just one more. We have 2 minutes, and then obviously I'll just say we will send you a feedback form as well.
Yeah.
Just so
Yes, please.
But yeah, we have a question from Dr. Ase. So it says in that question, in your opening statement, you mentioned the construction industry is one of the sectors to be affected due to the current funding model that is government funded. Is there a case for this to explore new funding models?
Yeah, but I think here's the thing. There is take housing for example. That's been an issue in this country for the last 40 years. One of the things that a lot of people use when they complain, for example, about immigration, is the fact that they believe they're a drain on resources. Whereas a closer look at the actual root causes, it's just the fact that there hasn't been for many decades a proper a house building program in this country that looks at affordable housing. There's a lot of housing being built, not much of it is affordable, and so so it's one of the reasons why it has been necessary for governments to intervene and actually put down a significant proportion of investment so as to encourage the private sector. But as something like this pandemic kind of demonstrates, that can have its weaknesses as well. I would argue that as a model, it's still probably the better model than simply allowing the waiting for the investment to come wholly from the private sector. However, yes, there is always a case. There is always a case for continuing to explore alternative modes of funding. My only kind of question with that would be, can you do things on the kind of scales that governments can do without a government driven initiative? I don't know the answer to that. I'll just ask that question.
I'm guessing you probably be getting a lot of questions on LinkedIn tonight, Ali.
No, I don't mind. I don't mind at all. That's fine.
Well, that'll be. Thanks everyone for joining the webcast. It's really been a pleasure having this discussion.
There was somebody at the start who wanted to join in. Had that person speak?
I think we captured.
Oh, you did. Okay. That's fine. Okay. I was worried we might have missed them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to keep everyone updated, really, on our next event. We've got the next event on the 8th of April, Wednesday. Titi will be taking in charge of that, discussing chemistry, which I might learn a thing of too, because I wasn't really good at chemistry at school. And then on the 15th of April, we've got turning fear and anxiety into opportunities. This actually sounds fun. So everyone sign up on the website. We'll keep you updated on the AFB social medias as well. But yeah, it's been a really good discussion. Thanks very much, Dr. Ali. Thanks everyone for attending as well. I hope everyone stays safe. Stay in.